get ready to delve into the darkness of history. Explore chilling mysteries and hidden secrets on our channel. Subscribe now and uncover the secrets that haunt the night. Ever since I was a child, I've been fascinated by horror stories. Perhaps that's why, when I grew up, I decided to look for an old, abandoned house to buy and renovate. My intention was to transform the house into a themed inn, a place where guests could experience fear up close, but in a safe and fun way. Little did I know that this decision would change my life forever. I found the perfect house in a small town in the countryside, surrounded by tall trees and an air of mystery that seemed to envelop the place. It was a Victorian mansion, imposing and at the same time frightening. The structure was deteriorated by time, with broken windows and creaking doors, but still, there was something majestic about it. When I asked the locals about the house, they all seemed reluctant to talk about it. Some just said it was haunted, while others preferred to change the subject. An old man, however, told me a story that sent chills down my spine. According to him, the house had been the scene of a family tragedy many years ago. The family that lived there mysteriously disappeared, and since then, strange events have occurred in the mansion. Ignoring the warnings and intrigued by the mystery, I bought the house. The renovation began immediately. During the day, everything seemed normal. The workers didn't report anything strange, except for a few occasional sounds that they attributed to the wind or the old structure of the house. However, during the night, it was a different story. The first night I spent in the house was unforgettable. I was in one of the second-floor bedrooms, trying to sleep, when I heard a whisper. It was low, almost inaudible, but it was there. I thought it was my imagination, so I tried to ignore it. But the whisper continued, becoming clearer. It sounded like a female voice, repeating a phrase I couldn't understand. I got out of bed and turned on the light. The whisper stopped immediately. I went to the window and looked outside. Nothing but darkness and the shadows of the trees. I went back to bed, but sleep did not come easily. I spent the rest of the night awake, alert to any sound. In the following days, I began to notice other phenomena. Objects moved around, doors opened and closed on their own, and there was always that feeling of being watched. One night, while walking down the hallway, I saw a shadow moving quickly on one of the walls. I ran over, but there was nothing. Just silence and dim light. As the weeks passed, the events became more intense. I started hearing heavy footsteps upstairs, even when I was alone in the house. Lights flickered for no apparent reason, and a cold sensation invaded the rooms, even on the hottest days. I decided to install security cameras to try to capture some evidence of what was happening. I reviewed the recordings every night. Most of them showed nothing unusual, until one of them terrified me. In one of the recordings, I saw a dark figure walking down the hallway. The figure was indistinct, like a dense, shapeless shadow. It stopped in front of my bedroom door, stood there for a few seconds, and then disappeared. That vision made me decide to seek help. I consulted with a paranormal expert. He agreed to come to the house and conduct an investigation. On the day of his visit, he brought sophisticated equipment, including motion detectors, night vision cameras, and audio recorders. We started the investigation at midnight. The expert quickly detected intense activity. The motion detectors went off several times, even when there was no one around. We captured audio recordings of whispering voices and distant laughter. The night vision cameras recorded orbs of light floating through the hallways. But what happened next was the most frightening. While we were in the basement, we heard a deafening scream coming from upstairs. We ran to see what it was, but there was no one there. However, the door to the bedroom where I slept was open, and inside, we found a broken mirror. In the reflection of the shards, we could see distorted faces, as if they were trapped inside the mirror, looking directly at us. The expert turned pale and said the house was possessed by tormented spirits. According to him, the tragedy that occurred there left souls trapped, unable to find peace. He suggested performing an exorcism ritual to try to free them. The ritual was scheduled for the following night. I invited some friends to join me because I didn't want to face it alone. When the ritual began, the atmosphere in the house changed drastically. The air became heavy, and a sense of malevolence filled the environment. The experts started chanting in Latin, while lighting candles and spreading salt around the corners of the rooms. Suddenly, all the doors and windows began to slam violently. The candles were extinguished by a cold breeze, and the room was plunged into darkness. We heard whispers and moans coming from all directions. An invisible force pushed us against the walls, and a chilling cold swept through our bodies. The expert continued the ritual, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. Gradually, the activity diminished. The doors stopped slamming, and the whispers grew weaker. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, silence reigned again. The expert announced that the spirits had been freed and that the house was now clear. That night, we slept in the living room, exhausted and shaken by what we had experienced. For the first time since I moved into the house, there were no whispers, footsteps, or shadows. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The following days were peaceful. I continued the renovation of the house and eventually managed to open the themed horror I had always dreamed of. The guests loved the experience, although I never told them the true story behind the house. It was a memory I preferred to leave in the past. Today, looking back, I wonder if I made the right choice in buying that mansion. The experience was terrifying and changed my view of the supernatural. I learned that there are forces beyond our comprehension and that not all horror stories are just fiction. Some are very real, and living through one is something I will never forget. If you are watching this video, remember, not everything we see and hear can be explained by logic. There are mysteries and forces that defy our understanding, and sometimes, it's better to leave certain places and stories forgotten. But if you have the courage and curiosity, the House of Shadows will always be there, waiting for those who dare to uncover its secrets. I've always been skeptical about the supernatural. Growing up, I heard stories of ghosts and spirits, but I never truly believed. That changed in the fall of 2019. I had bought an old house in a small town in the countryside. It was a beautiful Victorian building, over 100 years old. It needed renovations, but the price was irresistible. Little did I know, I wasn't just buying a house, but a nightmare. The first week was quiet. I spent my days cleaning and painting, getting the place ready to move in. By the second week, I started noticing strange things. Small objects would disappear and reappear in different places. I thought it was just fatigue or distraction. But then, one night, I heard footsteps upstairs. I lived alone and knew there was no one else in the house. I climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight in hand. The footsteps stopped. I checked all the rooms but found nothing. I tried to convince myself it was just the sound of the old house settling. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. In the third week, I began having nightmares. I dreamed of a woman in a white dress, with empty eyes and a malevolent smile. She stood at the foot of my bed, whispering words I couldn't understand. I woke up sweating, feeling like someone was watching me. I decided to investigate the history of the house. I found out it had belonged to a wealthy family in the 19th century. The youngest daughter, Elizabeth, died mysteriously at the age of 17. There were rumors that she was murdered by her own father, who went mad with remorse and hung himself in the same house. I told my friends about the odd occurrences. They laughed and said I was imagining things. But one night, I invited 2 of them to stay in the house with me. I thought having company would make me feel safer. After a few beers and lots of laughter, we all went to sleep. At 3 in the morning, we were awakened by a terrifying scream. We rushed into the hallway and found my friend Clara standing there, pale as a ghost. She said she had seen the woman from my nightmares. We tried to calm her down, but she was in shock. The next morning, Clara left and never came back. I was determined to find out what was happening. I bought security cameras and installed them throughout the house. I wanted to prove I wasn't crazy. On the first night, the cameras captured something terrifying. At 3 in the morning, a white figure appeared in the hallway. It floated slowly, not touching the ground. Its shape was vague, but I knew it was Elizabeth. As she passed by the camera, all the lights in the house flickered and an intense cold swept over me. I showed the video to a specialist in paranormal phenomena. He told me the house was haunted by the restless spirit of Elizabeth. She was trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead, seeking justice for her murder. I didn't want to leave the house. I felt somehow connected to Elizabeth. I decided to hold a séance to try to communicate with her. I invited a renowned medium to help me. He warned me that Elizabeth's spirit was dangerous, but I was determined. On the night of the séance, the medium and I sat in the living room, surrounded by candles. He began to invoke Elizabeth, asking her to manifest herself. The temperature dropped drastically, and the candles began to tremble. I felt a cold, oppressive presence. The medium went into a trance, and suddenly, his voice changed. He spoke with a female voice, full of pain and anger. Elizabeth told her story. Her father had killed her when he found out she was pregnant by a servant in the house. He couldn't bear the shame and, in a fit of madness, strangled her. Then, consumed with remorse, he hung himself. She pleaded for justice, for release. I was in shock. I felt a mix of fear and compassion. I promised Elizabeth the first would help her. The medium told me we needed to perform a ritual to free her soul. We had to find the ring she wore when she was killed, buried with her in the basement of the house. We went down to the basement, armed with shovels and lanterns. The air was suffocating, with a smell of mold and decay. After hours of digging, we found a small wooden box. Inside it was an old, rusty ring. When I touched it, I felt a wave of energy run through my body. We returned to the living room and began the ritual. The medium recited words in Latin, and I placed the ring in the center of the circle of candles. Suddenly, the candles went out, and a bright light filled the room. Elizabeth appeared, clearer than ever. Her face was serene, and she smiled at me. "Thank you," she whispered before disappearing in a cloud of light. The house fell silent. I felt a peace I hadn't felt in weeks. In the following days, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. There were no more footsteps upstairs, no more nightmares or apparitions. Clara called me, saying she felt better and wanted to visit. When she arrived, we sat in the living room, reminiscing about what had happened. We decided to keep the story between us, as a dark and fascinating secret. The Victorian house became a true home. I felt I had helped Elizabeth find peace. But sometimes, at night, I still feel a gentle touch on my shoulder, as if she is thanking me again. And while I remain skeptical about many things, I know there is more between heaven and earth than we can understand. And that some souls, even after all this time, still seek rest.